Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life.
Hats.
Brendo, how are you?
I'm not too bad. How are you?
Are we talking about that, are we, or not?
Oh, how you feeling?
I'm not feeling great.
Yeah.
I've probably got the Rona.
Maybe
Got the Rona, so anyway, that's where we are.
Yeah, so
I feel not great, but I'm okay.
So
Life goes on.
We are social distancing outside.
Yeah.
Plenty of air, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, what are we? Episode 22? Episode
23.
23.
I think.
Jordan. Today we have Richard James on the pod. How are you, Richard?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm doing well. How are you, Brendo?
I'm pretty well, mate. We did try to speak to you at Murrurundi, and we did actually speak to you, but my terrible recording and the terrible wind made it unusable, unfortunately. So it's actually great to have you finally on in the new year. So, yeah, welcome.
So we have to start with, we'll start with two apologies, because one is the wind and the audio and stuff like that. The other point was, I got to tell this because it reflects really badly on me. But so, Richard introduced himself at Murrurundi as Richard, and then right. Totally humbly, it's just his name, and then said something along the lines, "Oh, are you the guy from the podcast?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm." I felt quite special at that point, and without realizing who I was talking to. So Richard is the chap who has done 3 movies.
Yes.
We've got Hard Money, Autonomy of the State, and Petrodollars. That's the ones I'm aware of. There may be more, Richard, so we'll chat about all of them. But I apologise for my ego getting in the way of my mouth, or don't know, whatever. I didn't mean it.
But to be fair, it's not like you were going, yeah, I am Hats.
No.
What do you do?
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. But thanks for being humble, mate.
And to be honest, I think for most of that day, he kept talking about how he kind of brushed you and felt so guilty because he found out afterwards, he goes, "Oh, this is the Hard Money dude." And he's like, fuck.
I think Wiz told me at the bar and then watched my face go red. So anyway, that was that. Thank you. Thanks for being humble.
Stay humble.
That's
exactly. So we'll go there. We'll go to the movies, but we'll maybe let's talk a little bit about your work life, if you don't mind doing that, and then your story into Bitcoin, and then get to the movies, if that's all right. If you're happy to, just as much as you're willing to go on then. Sorry, Brenda's just opening a beer as well.
I'm trying to quietly. It's not working.
No, you want to open it into the microphone.
Oh, look, Odell's got that. Yeah.
I guess he's patented that move.
Yeah. I'll go get the whiskey from upstairs. I might need it. But are you okay with that, mate? Are you happy to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do that sort of format?
Because it's real. Yeah, it's like, Bitcoin is sort of part of our, where our business is like a Bitcoin standard business. Like so, we try and keep any spare cash that we've got in Bitcoin rather than in dollars. And it actually was one of those things where it sort of because it's a travel business. So we're in the travel industry. We've got like a tour operations, and we do like trekking and hiking and stuff like that. It was kind of the main line of business. We do some different stuff now. We've sort of been forced to kind of diversify a little bit. And we're going into like producing food is kind of the main thing we're doing these days, like outdoor food, that you take in these pouches that you take with you on camping trips and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Trying to build up a different part of the business. It's not, that can still grow in this environment where people aren't really traveling. Cause it's like 3 years late. I don't know. Is it 2 years or 3 years? I lose track of the years of this whole bloody thing.
Like, 2.
But yeah, it feels like 10, but like we're still no closer to, getting back to where anywhere close to where we were. And like we used to do mainly international travel. And so we in last year we were trying to do more local stuff, to sort of make up because we couldn't travel internationally. But even that was just such a nightmare that we all pretty much had to give up on that, because like we had situations where we'd be sending a group of clients somewhere, and they were in the air, and then the state government would change the policy and go into lockdown, or like close the border and send people back to where they came from. And it's like, people pay all this money, and then it's like, well, whose fault is it? And it's just a total shit show.
How has that been in terms of like the insuring the travelers and all that kind of stuff? Is that on them, or is that on you guys?
It's like this. It's still a gray area. I mean, and I still, like, at the trips that we're doing at the moment, like, we've had to just say, look, it's all, we can't take any responsibility for what happens if a government makes a decision that means the trip can't go ahead. And I mean, that's standard travel insurance. Like, when this whole COVID thing blew up in, what was it, February or March of 2020, there was no travel insurance, that would cover anything to do with this. And so that was hard. Like, so, every company in the industry was kind of, most of them were trying to kind of play hardball and keep clients' money, and sort of, but we sort of like, look, we tried to just kind of give everyone their money back, and
because that's the right thing to do. It's not,
because it's like, but I still don't know. Like,
we're only so long you can do that for, exactly, right?
Oh, entirely.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I still don't even know what the deal is. Like, we're planning a trip, or we booked a couple of nights away. And I was like, especially with everything that's going on now, like, if you're like, what happens if you, like, in your situation, Hats, like, you're feeling under the weather, like, the right thing to do is not to go out into the world, and it's probably, but it's like, do you then forgo, like, you can't claim that kind of shit on travel. It's like, the whole thing is a huge gray area. And so we've sort of, it was a funny experience, because, about 10 years ago, like, I sort of started a business, and like, that was what it happened to be in that, I sort of fell into that industry by a few kind of twists of fate. And the main thing I wanted to do was start a business, run my own business, be my own boss, like, set my life up so that I could basically do what I wanted to do. And that's been an interesting road, in that, like, it's great. It's great, but it's also, there's a lot of uncertainty, like, you don't have it's not like you have a steady income. It's sort of like, there's these trade-offs, and
that's even true in non-COVID times, right? So, running your own business,
even at the best of times,
the best of times,
exactly. And I used to, when the business was kind of up and running, we had all sorts of challenges, as even pre-COVID, like we almost didn't make it, and then we were doing reasonably well for a couple of years, but I used to sort of have these nightmares about, like, what if, because most of our travel was in, our main thing we did was in Papua New Guinea, so we would do the Kokoda track, because I'm sort of into the military history, and so we would take people up there and, like, take them over the Kokoda track and talk about the battles, between the Australians and the Japanese.
Sorry, you've done the Kokoda track, what, a couple of times, or?
Yeah, I've probably, I sort of 25 times or something.
Wow.
I used to do it a few times a year.
So you're a fit bugger.
Well, like, it's one of those things where you just kind of, like, especially if you're with a group of 20 people, or however many you take up there, like, you can only go as fast as the slowest person. So, and it's all, and if you know how to pace yourself, and you sort of know what you're in for, it's fine. It's more like, it's pretty full on, like, living up in the jungle. It's almost that as much as the physical fitness. So actually, it's been nice to have a couple of years off from doing that, because I sort of did that for 10 years. But I would sometimes like, wake up in the night and be like, shit, like, imagine if some, and I always thought it would be like, a violent incident, like someone, like, because it's a pretty wild part of the world. It's like someone's going to get shot, someone's going to get robbed, and like the whole industry will sort of get shut down. And it's been through little scares like that. And so, you know, I would like, our business would be totally destroyed, like if we couldn't travel to this part of the world. And then fast forward to COVID, and it was like, yeah, in your wildest dreams, you couldn't imagine something so destructive to your whole business. So it's, I sort of went through that. It's funny, like I've been through that and come out the other end and actually feel, I think I'm in a better place now than I was. Like the business has survived and is actually doing well because, first of all, because we basically had to reinvent and start from scratch, almost doing something completely different. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's a standard story in startup businesses. Like you sort of, they've got fancy language for it. Well, I've never been in that sort of culture, but like, you sort of have to, you constantly, you can plan for a business and write as many business plans and budgets as you want, and they're always, completely wrong. And so you're almost just reacting to things as they occur. So I think, so one thing that saved us was, I think we did that well. And another was Bitcoin. Like we'd built up a reserve of Bitcoin in the business, and that kind of seen us through. That was a few years ago, and we've held on to that, and it's appreciated, and it's kind of given us this like safety net to sort of meant we've been able to get through a difficult time.
So don't talk about numbers specifically, but is it something that you look at the Bitcoin as your kind of the savings account of the business, or whatever, the capital of the business, and then you have cash that you have Aussie dollars that you run your sort of operating cash flow from? Or I mean, how do you split it percentage wise? How do you even think that through?
Exactly. That's pretty much the way we think about it. But there was a point there where it was so, things were looking so dire that we sort of, we really we didn't have any cash, cash left. And it was like, shit, like, do we sort of, but I also didn't want to sell the Bitcoin. So we sort of somehow got through that period without having to sell any of it. But then, I'm not one for, I've tried trading Bitcoin a little bit, but it's freaking hard. Like, and your emotions almost always get the better of you if you've got a relatively short-term sort of time horizon. But with that Bitcoin treasury in the business, it's sort of, because it's like a 5-year time horizon that we've been working on, and that'll extend out even longer, I'm sure. You sort of, we've been able to kind of, and keep enough of a cash buffer to not, the last thing you want is to be forced to sell it at a bad time. So with a bit of luck, a bit of, we sort of, were able to sell a little bit at, a couple of months ago when the market was high, and now, to get us a bit more cash to go through. And now we're like, well, it's looking pretty cheap right now, and so maybe we should sort of buy that back, what we sold. So I don't know. Some people, but me personally, when it comes to, my own savings, I just think the simplest thing is to you just dollar cost average, like, and just forget about it, like come back to it in a couple of decades, and that's worked well for me. It's amazing how the DCA thing, personally, like, that was a real life change. Not life changing, I mean, that's exaggeration, but like, it's so much better than I spent a year or two trying to, you buy the dip when it's cheap, and that just sends you like crazy. So
and the time you spend over trying to be smarter than everybody else. So I mean, you've come back, you've kind of edged back on the lifesaver thing, but I mean, is over the long a long enough time period. It probably is. Like if your dollar cost averaging, daily, weekly, monthly over a long enough time period, if you look it back on it in 10 years' time, it probably is a life changer.
Oh, absolutely. I think both because of the nature of the asset and just if you've got the discipline to do that. I mean, even if you do that in the stock market or whatever, like I'm sure with patience, and if you overcome those emotional or cognitive biases that make most people terrible at trading, whether you're trading Bitcoin or trading anything, I think that's a recipe for success. But couple that with it being Bitcoin, people who've been doing that for long enough periods are always come out on top. Even people who started, and there are a lot of people in this boat, like at the peak of that 2017 bull market, and there's people who bought then and but were able to stick it out and like keep averaging right through the next few years. And now, you looked like an idiot back then, but even those
every purchase is sub 18,000,
are fantastic. Yeah, exactly. What would you give to buy Bitcoin for $18,000 now?
So the business came before the Bitcoining, is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly.
So
yeah,
what was the process of I guess you becoming a Bitcoiner and then going, hey, I need to incorporate this in some way into the business?
They were sort of, the Bitcoin thing happens kind of separately. That was just something that I fell into kind of on my own accord. I've always been interested in economics and not so much. Yeah, like I studied economics and but then like didn't really like the way it was taught through school and university, and I kind of I kind of dropped out of university, the economics side at least, because it was just I couldn't handle the way it was being taught. But I kind of maintained an interest in that, and so I was kind of I sort of got into Austrian economics. Like I somehow came across this version of economics that I'd never heard of before, and that for a couple of years I was like in that gold bug type kind of camp where you sort of think that the whole system's going to collapse, and which I think is true, but yeah, the best that I could come up with was that gold was the safest asset, and that if and when the current monetary system collapsed, it would be rebuilt on gold somehow, with gold as the base money, which I no longer think that that's going to happen. But there are plenty of people who would say that it's also equally insane to think that Bitcoin's going to replace the current system. So, but I think simply, regardless of where you stand on that debate, the simple fact is that it was good timing to get out of gold and into Bitcoin. The Bitcoin's done vastly better, over the last few years. So yeah, I was one of those people who, thankfully, like it wasn't like I came through like a shit coining, path, or like I was already sort of learning about some of these principles that people in Bitcoin espouse. And so when I came across Bitcoin, I was like, immediately I was like, oh, this is the thing. Like, this is what I've been looking for. I'd heard, because I think I'd heard about it in 2017. One of my friends mentioned it, and of course I was like, that sounds dumb. Like you wouldn't ever want to buy that. You lose all your money. I just never even I didn't think twice about it. And then, it wasn't until a year or two later that I heard about it again, and someone recommended the Bitcoin Standard. So yeah, read the Bitcoin Standard, and that was it. From then on, it was obvious that this is this is the thing, like from a and so it started, and I think it's turned out to be a good investment, both personally and from a business point of view. But yeah, I didn't expect this personal journey of kind of completely changing my outlook on life and on politics, and sort of totally changing the way I view the world, and basically meeting and becoming involved in a community that of people who think the same way. It's been a really interesting personal journey for me.
Have you had the same experience of just not being able to consume enough information? And one, have you had that? And two, have you come through it, or are you still in it?
It sort of ebbs and flows. Like, I remember that first year was just, that feeling of you just literally can't get enough, and you're just listening to podcasts. Just, might listen to 6 or 7 hours of podcasts every day for months on end, and reading a lot of books. And I think I've come out the other end now, in that I'll sort of go through phases. Like, for a couple of months, I might, the only podcast I'm listening to, a Bitcoin podcast, and I'm still focused on that. And then
number one, 2-bit idiots.
Absolutely. And then, then I might switch it up and kind of read books and listen to stuff that's totally different. So that, that's how I kind of knew that I think I'll always be, I don't think I'll ever go too far from Bitcoin. But yeah, I've noticed that I've kind of come out the other end a little bit in terms of that obsessiveness with it, which definitely went on for a couple of years.
Yeah. I think I'm still there.
Yeah, well, I am.
You're definitely there.
I'm definitely there, but I've been here for a long time, and I can't get out. I'm getting worse. If any, probably. Maybe. I mean, I every now and again I do get like a day where I sort of chill out and go do something.
But are you forcing yourself to do that?
No,
do you know what I mean? Like, I need to step away.
Well, particularly when the stupidity starts to kick, when it's all on price, right? So when the price starts to fall back, and you haven't lost any of your conviction, but other people already, you can see people blowing up all over the place, and I'm just like, I can't be doing this just now. I need to step away and whatever. But yeah. But I come back like every time. So it's a funny thing. Yeah, it's a funny thing.
I'm with you, and it's like, the other thing is, it's kind of a lot of and I'm sure everyone's interface with this whole thing is Twitter. And so that's the other thing, is like, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Twitter, because I think it's, on the one hand, it's the thing that's allowed me to connect with all these people and kind of do this work that's, show the work that I'm doing to this community. And it's also actually allowed me to get, to get some work in that video editing field as well. So but on the other hand, it's too much time on Twitter can kind of send you crazy as well. So I think that's part of it as well. Like, when I purposefully step back a little bit from Twitter for a few weeks or so, sort of take a break, like you sort of, I feel like I'm sucked back into the real world a little bit and think less about Bitcoin, and then inevitably you sort of dive back into Bitcoin Twitter, and off you go again.
It's like a drug, isn't it? It's like an addictive thing. But then you've not. So you've. Let me just. I'm trying to work through the time of this. So you won't have done like a PNG trip since you've been as fully into Bitcoin. Is that right? Or so it's not like you're getting a break on a tour and you're just putting all the digital things down, and you're going to have. And then you're getting a 2 week or 3 week.
Yeah, I don't get those like full digital detoxes anymore. Yeah, and I mean that's fine. It's I'm sort of willing and able to do it just in a day-to-day life. I sort of delete the app for a couple of weeks and stuff like that. But we were traveling all through, working all through 2019, say. So I was kind of working on the business, traveling, but also sort of in the beginnings of that whole Bitcoin journey. And then when, and that was when I was kind of really first kind of buying Bitcoin, and then 6 months later or so, I sort of went to the rest of the team and the other owners of the business and was like, look, I think we should do this. I think this will be the right thing for us going forward. And thankfully that was good. That was good timing. And so when 2020 rolled around, I all of a sudden found myself at home, wasn't traveling, didn't really, we spent a couple of months just with this bullshit, like refunding, like literally took months to get all the sort of paperwork out of the way to actually lose money and lose all our clients. And you're still working like crazy. But then it was like, well, I got nothing to do. And it's funny that because I'd been, and so that's when I started doing the filmmaking work, which I'd in a sort of almost like a former life, like I was into filmmaking. Like I used to make documentaries. I made some surf films and skiing films. That was kind of my thing. And I did that. And but like there wasn't any.
That was work, or if it was
well,
fun?
This is the thing, is like I went to film school. I was making these films, and they were like paying for themselves, and they would get like, we were doing distribution deals, and they were like, they weren't just kind of hobby projects, but it's not really enough. It's not enough to you can't earn a living really just doing that. And it's more like it pays for itself, pays for your, because they were all trips that we do. We travel and film and make these projects, and then it sort of pay for itself. But the other guys in that industry,
a fun life, but it's hard to get ahead.
It was fun life, but you can't really, it's hard to get ahead. So guys would go down the sort of road of doing like advertising or corporate video, or maybe like you break into the sort of professional film, the industry where you're working on big film sets. But that was never my, I actually found that stressful kind of, I'm more of a loner. Like I sort of like working on my own and like working in a big team, like on a big project where it's stressful and deadlines like that freaked me out. So I didn't really want to do that. And this opportunity came up, in the to sort of start this travel business. And so we ran a few trips and found that was more profit. This is something I did with my brother. Like he and I did some of the filmmaking work, and then we started the business together. And we're like, oh, well, this is kind of actually, this looks like it's a better opportunity to potentially make a career. And it was quite seasonal. So you like work for half the year and then you still be able to travel and do some film stuff. But it's sort of, the business became more and more of a full-time thing, and then I've had a family. And so, I sort of completely stopped doing any film making work. But then, fast forward to 2020, and we're sitting around at home in lockdown, bloody Melbourne. It's the worst place to be.
Or the best as far as getting you to sort of do something creative or something.
And I'd like in the couple of years leading up to it, I'd almost been wanting to sort of, because I was just at a point where I wanted to get back to doing creative work. And I was like, I'd sometimes have these daydreams, like, what if I sort of left the business and went off and made a film or did something else, and then, but never sort of acted on it. And then all of a sudden I was thrown in the situation where, well, you sort of got no choice now. I've got nothing better to do. So which
one came first? Hard Money came first?
It was, exactly. And I sort of, I'd sort of been like, because I've also over the years done a bit of writing, and so I've when you guys you sort of like, when you're in that initial phase of absorbing content about Bitcoin, like I sort of felt the need to try and write it down, almost like to get it straight in my own head, like this whole question of what is money, and like how Bitcoin relates to gold and relates to the whole theory of economics. And and the history of money and the history of Bitcoin. Like I forced myself to learn sort of as much as I could about the actual cryptography and the maths behind it and the history of Bitcoin. Like that was a really illuminating thing for me, like learning about all the like Bit Gold and B Money and the cypherpunks and like Liberty Dollars and like the e-cash and like that whole kind of history of digital cash. I found that a really useful way to get my head around Bitcoin. And so I was writing, but then, I just wasn't writing anything that I thought was good enough to publish. And you'd read something by like Robert Breedlove and be like, or Gigi, and it's like, oh, well, there was so much good writing being done that I was like, I've got nothing to contribute here. But I was like, there's actually not a lot of video content at the time. I didn't think there was much. There were a few documentaries around, but they were more like crypto sort of like they weren't really, nothing was capturing that essence of the, it was not long after the Bitcoin standard had been published. And I think that book was so critical to the whole community's like crystallizing of what Bitcoin actually represented. Because I think that in the years before, even though I wasn't personally around, I feel like it hadn't been decided exactly what Bitcoin was. Like, was it this peer-to-peer cash? Like the whole block size war, what was the future of Bitcoin? Like, it wasn't obvious that a store of value was its like main selling point, and like this kind of new version of gold based on these principles of Austrian economics. Like I think it was really the Bitcoin standard that sort of crystallized that narrative. And this was not long after that. And people were still kind of, I think, formulating that story. And I found that, I didn't think there was a lot of good writing and a lot of amazing podcast conversations, but not a lot of great video content. So I thought, this is potentially an opportunity. And so I sort of sat down at my desk and cut like a little thing together in one evening, which turned out to be the first sort of couple of minutes of the film. And then thought, I think there's something here. And so then kind of thought about it a bit more and was like, I'll do this project, but I don't want to, I'm in lockdown. So I set myself these parameters, like, it's all got to be from your desk. Like, you're not allowed to go out. You can't go out and collect content, whether it's recording video or audio. I didn't know, and I didn't know anyone in Bitcoin, so it's not like I could call these people up. Even
really?
Like,
that's really interesting, because if you actually go, it's like a who's who of Bitcoiners now. If you look at the cast,
exactly,
that's right.
Never spoken to any. Like, I had a Twitter account, like, that was just a zero, like, zero followers. Like, it was like a jumble of letters. Like, and I wasn't on Twitter. I was just lurking on Twitter to get my kind of Bitcoin content. And so I was like, look, I'm just gonna, there's so much good content out there that I'm just gonna kind of try and piece it together into a story that I think is the most important story to tell about Bitcoin.
So you're basically like clipping little edits of little snippets of podcasts, and that's what formed the content of the movie.
Exactly. So I'd be listening to podcasts, and I would, like, every time I'd hear something that I thought resonated, I would like take a screenshot of the time, and then I'd go back. It was so painstaking. Like, I'd go back and grab that 10 seconds, and it might be, 10 seconds of safety. And then 3 podcasts later, like, Preston Pish might say something that like continued that thought. So I would grab that and add it in. And like, then Michael Goldstein would say something. And so, it kind of came together that way.
That's one thing. Oh, sorry, go.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, one thing that struck me with Hard Money too was just the range of different content that you would, if you've done this all by yourself, which you have, or not only the audio, but all those little video clips and the classic old cartoons and stuff like that. What was the time frame for you? How long did it actually take you from concept to, all right, I think it's done?
It was probably 3 months.
That's incredible.
And Yeah, and I was lucky. Like, it was also a time where, I think, I don't know what exactly. I'm trying to think back to sort of the personal circumstances of my family and stuff, but like, no, I've got 3 little kids, and it's hard to get anything done. You guys both know about this, and so it was also just a time where, for whatever reason, like, the kids were at this sweet spot with the kids, and I was able to like do sort of 9 to 5 like work for a couple of weeks on end, which is something that I sort of have struggled a bit with before and after and since, because of just the demands of family life. So yeah, I was just in this sweet spot of consistent work, and it was almost like the putting together the story from the podcast was almost not the easy part, but that was the part that came first. And then it's like, well, shit, like, what do you put as the video? Like, because they're talking about these kind of esoteric topics like money and economics. And so I don't know how it happened that I stumbled across some of these old films on YouTube, but there was a guy called, I think his name is John Sutherland, produced this bunch of cartoons in the 50s, and a lot of them are about, it's really interesting, like they're about the kind of politics that we're talking about now, and they're about money. A lot of them are about money, and so I was like, oh, this is amazing, like this. And so that sort of formed, I was like, okay, well, this kind of stuff could actually work as if it's cut together, right? And so that sort of became, however it happened, that like the visual basis of it. But that was tough to find, that got me a certain distance. But then, there were times when it was really difficult to find the right footage to cut in and sort of try and make a narrative both visually and audially.
And just if, Preston has like 15-20 seconds of some great thought, but then you have to find some matching video that's for one, finding something that's exactly sort of there's a similar idea, or you can see a relatable idea, but it has to also be 15 to 20 seconds long to it's this. Okay,
there are a couple of days. There are days where I'd sort of sit at my desk and then like get up 6 hours, and I've been like trawling YouTube, or like and I get up like, oh shit, like I literally didn't achieve anything in this day. But like there was no other way to.
But then the flip side of that is every now and again you would just get some little piece of gold,
you'd come across just gold, like so deep in YouTube or these other like video archive. Yeah, every now and then you would strike gold, and that would like keep me going for another couple of days. Yeah, it was a fun process. It was kind of a lonely process, but like that's how I've realized that that's sort of how I like to work. Like I seem to work best on my own like that. So it's sort of, and then when I sort of finished the thing, then I was like, well, kind of now what do I do? Like I've got a Twitter account, but no one follows me. Like, how do I? And do these people, are they going to be angry that I've like stolen their audio so I sort of didn't quite know what to do, but I just ended up sending like cold Twitter DMs to like everyone who was in the project, like both the people who were speaking and or like the hosts of the podcast, and got a surprisingly, and you could imagine getting a DM from like an anonymous Twitter account with 0 followers. Like I'm amazed that anyone even opened the message. And I mean, some people didn't. Some of them didn't even have messaging.
Hey, how's your trading going?
Yeah, how's your trade? And just a few of them like responded. I'm like, oh, cool. I will have a look at that. And I think it was Ben and Colin from WTF happened in 1971. Like because they sort of were the ones I first sort of got speaking to, because I think it was it might have even been them that me listening to them that kind of sparked the idea in the first place. I remember them being on a podcast and being asked or discussing this idea of their thing, the WTF 1971 thing, being a cool idea for a documentary. And I was like, yeah, that's an awesome idea for a documentary. And they were like, but you know, you then got to get the funding, and we think you probably need a couple of $100,000. And I was like, and I thought about it, I was like, look, I mean, I'm sure you could do something for like a lot less than that, especially given that like the content, you know, this is out there already, like with these podcasts. So yeah, that was kind of and the film starts with those guys, with Nixon and the, you know, the closing of the gold window in 71. So they, you know, they were the first ones that sort of retweeted the little trailer that I'd put on Twitter, and it sort of went from there. And it sort of went crazy. Like that first day, like this thing's getting shared around. I was like, oh my God, like this is amazing. Like people are actually, you know, really interested in this. And yeah, the reception it had was quite amazing. And it's funny that I haven't even actually been able to recapture that, in that the projects I've done since have not quite had the same, you know, they just haven't had as many people look at them because they just haven't been shared as widely, and I haven't been able to capture that kind of whatever it is that makes something go a little bit viral. It's a hard money is the film that
what is that? It's like the magic kind of.
Even just in the titles, though, I think Hard Money very much resonates with the Bitcoiners, and the Bitcoiners want to support, whereas the other two perhaps not quite so obvious. But am I right in saying in Hard Money there's no reference to Bitcoin at all? I think so. I watched all three today. I'd watched two before. No, I watched all three today.
Yeah, the Billy Joel one. The what is it? Whoa,
yeah,
for the longest time he's talking about Bitcoin, and it's like a parody song.
And so that was the other like parameter that I set myself, was that I'm not actually going to mention Bitcoin in the film, because like shilling Bitcoin is such an art form that like, and I think the main pitfall is like going too hard too early and sounding like a total crazy person.
Yes.
And so the philosophy was like, yeah, if you can kind of make people understand that they've actually do have a problem with their own money, which is for us here in Australia, or if you're in the US, like that's not obvious. You know, growing up, like you just, I don't know about you guys, but like you just take it so for granted that you never even think. You're like, yeah, well, I work, I earn money, I save it, then I buy stuff. Like what's the problem? So it was like trying to kind of make people understand that there is a bit of a problem with this system, and that and not push Bitcoin down anyone's throat. Like just be like, you know, this is the way it is, and perhaps Bitcoin is I sort of very vaguely kind of referred to it towards the end. And it's only that song in the credits that actually the word Bitcoin is said.
It's a great film to share with like your normie friends and family, I think, for that very reason.
So and I didn't actually think it would, I was almost doing it for people who are already like orange pilled into Bitcoin, if you know what I mean. Like that was kind of the target audience, just because I kind of wanted to do a project in that on that subject. Like it wasn't actually at the forefront of my mind to be like, oh, you know, this is something that people could show to someone who's never really thought about this stuff, or like this could be an introductory piece of material. That it's turned out that way, that it's been good for that. But it's funny that wasn't even the original intention.
Yeah.
So I would consider myself somebody who is, well, I used to consider myself as somebody who was probably left of centre politically. And I don't know about you guys, but I think over the last couple of years, that's where I sit is probably very different. Now, whether that's me that's moved or whether it's the world that's moved.
No, I'm in the exact same boat, and I had this conversation, I think, with Owen, off microphone or whatever.
Yeah.
That, you know... Sorry, you finish your thing. But very, very much the same, I think.
Yeah. it's well, when we're moving, whatever's happening, it's either us or it's the world, but something's changing, right? So, but the idea, from hard money to today, I'm like, can I just? This is just what I wrote down, right? So even proponents of the welfare state understand that they can only raise income tax so high before the people start to revolt, right? So they must tax another way. Talk to us about the unseen tax of inflation. I mean, that's really the idea, right? For me anyway, that's what I take from it, right? Most people are aware when they look at their income and they see the tax that's coming off, and they don't like it necessarily, but they're happy to contribute, right? Some more so than others, but I think everybody's happy to contribute in some shape or form. But very few people think about inflation at all. And it's only really now where we're starting, and certainly in other countries, but now more and more so here, and the States have just come out with a 7% year-on-year inflation. No, that's CPI numbers, which we all know are wrong. So when did that idea, that thought process start from you? Because that's very integral to that hard money film.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That is the crux of the whole thing. It's really a film about inflation. That's the topic, and the important point is that inflation is a hidden tax, and that is such a fundamental. And Bitcoin solves that problem by being resistant to inflation. Like that's the most important thing in all of this. I think, like it's certainly for me the most convincing argument as to why Bitcoin is important, because I think whether you come at it from left of center or whatever your thoughts are on the legitimacy of the government and its how big of a role should the government play in our lives, that's another story that maybe we'll get onto later. But yeah, as you say, like at least if it's a tax, it's obvious, it, and it's something that is done, maybe not willingly, but certainly explicitly. Whereas the main problem is that the governments of the modern world have grown to such an extent that they can't sustain themselves by taxation. Like there's just no way that you can fund the government via taxation alone. So the way the process works is that a government sort of co-opts the system of money. We use this term fiat a lot, which is kind of like a synonym for government issued money. It sort of means something. It just means like by decree. So dollars are money because the government designates those things as money. But it's sort of not as simple as that, because like no government has ever been able to literally just take a piece of paper from scratch and be like, this is money. Like it sort of is this longer process of co-opting whatever the free market money was, and it's usually gold. Like historically it's been gold, so that the governments kind of centralize the gold supply, and then they issue a paper note that is technically redeemable for gold, and that's what gives it its value. And then at some point they cut that tie between the paper note and the physical gold itself. So because they can then print more of these notes that are like IOUs, but and people trade those as if they were as good as gold, but slowly but surely the government is kind of creating more of the notes than they have actual gold to be able to redeem it. And that's what happened in the US in 1971, where Richard Nixon came on TV and said the US is no longer going to redeem its dollars for gold. And the reason, and that's sort of a bit of the historical path. And these days it's more sophisticated the way it's done, which is, physical cash is not really a thing. It's all done digitally. So basically the simple way it happens is a government goes into debt, and then the government sells treasury bonds to sort of finance that debt. And, the traditional way that works is that people, whether it's people buy the bonds to finance the government, whether it's the individual citizens of the country or whether it's banks or whether it's foreign governments. But increasingly what's happening is the central banks are just stepping in and buying those bonds from the government. And the central banks are the ones that literally create money out of nowhere. They literally, click a button on a computer and increase their balance sheet, and then they buy these bonds. So the governments have this way of monetizing debt, and that it basically means that they can capture the value of that money. They sort of never really have to pay it back. They go and spend the money in the same way that they take taxes and spend money. But yeah, it's this insidious process whereby they can keep spending, but they slowly but surely are devaluing the currency. So the purchasing power of the currency is going down. And so that is effectively like, it's a tax. It's like theft. It's a way for the government to spend money at the expense of its own citizens. And it's a way that to do it without them really knowing it. So it's the people who pay that price of the money printing are everyone who's forced to hold and use the currency, which is the citizens of the country. So it's a legal tender law that forces people to use a certain money, and then the government devalues that money and sort of skims the proceeds to just use for their own spending.
And then the exorbitant privilege in that situation is the US, because the vast majority of the world are using US dollars to settle, oil contracts or whatever. So that comes into your Petrodollars movie.
It's like a big pyramid scheme almost.
Well, it's exactly what it is, but it's so yeah. Let me just look at that one a little bit. So, the movies have actually gone backwards in some ways. Is that fair to say, in the sense that you've done the hard money thing and then you've gone back, and so what came second? Anatomy of the State came second.
It did, yeah.
And then Petrodollars came third, but Petrodollars actually starts talking about Bretton Woods 1944 and stuff like that, or even before that, some of it. But and then
exactly, yeah, it almost goes further back.
So does that mean?
Bretton Woods is because you're right. Hard money kind of kicks off in 1971 with the Nixon thing, whereas the Petrodollar story goes right back to Bretton Woods, which is 1944, and so I suppose it is. Yeah, it's like and there's some overlap there because obviously the whole. But I think the hard money was almost like giving an overview of the way that the system works, and it gives an example. It kicks off with what happened in 1971, just because that's this concrete example. But that the process that's kind of laid out in hard money, this way that governments use inflation as a hidden tax, like that's something that's done by every government, and it's not exclusive to the US. Like right now, the US kind of controls the system, but all the other governments still do it, and every government's done it going back since coins were first invented, and in the Roman Empire, that the king would kind of collect the coins and shave the edges and keep keep the what's left over for himself, or they'd mix the gold coins with copper or something to debase the we still say use the word currency debasement, and that's a throwback to when they literally mix the coins with some cheap money. So it's certainly not a new process, and so hard money was like an attempt to just lay out the process, whereas the Petrodollar story is really the historical story of how the US dollar came to be the sort of global reserve currency, and how they've the various tricks that they've used to sort of maintain that position over the years. And Anatomy of the State is almost like going back a step further to more talk about the nature of government itself. Yes. and because we talk about the entity that's responsible for this as we talk, it's the government. Okay, it's the central bank. Is the central bank part of the government? Like, So yeah, it's more of an exploration of the nature of government and the state itself, without necessarily being tied to a particular historical period.
So yeah, that's very much exploring sort of the libertarian angle of things, which you come across yourself in your studies. So I guess my question with regards to that one, I suppose, is sorry, I'm jumping all over the place here, but I hope you don't mind. I've got 1,000 questions I want to ask you, and I'm probably going to do it in a poor order. But so can the current political process be saved, in your opinion? And is there still a place for governments going forward, or what is the place for governments going forward?
It's a good question, and I think it's actually the most important question, because I've, through this process, I've become, the people are scared by the word anarchy, but I think an anarchist kind of sums up my my position of where I stand politically. I don't even think the word libertarian is strong enough to describe, the way I think about things these days, because I think the short answer is no, I don't think there's a role for government, but that's obviously a very controversial thing to say, and
possibly because people see here anarchy and they think, they maybe think mayhem, but what are we living in right now? I mean, are we thinking
how much worse could it be
for everybody? Is anybody sitting there right now thinking this is smooth sailing or whatever under anyone anywhere in the world right now? So
well there's always.
I think that. Oh, sorry, Brendo. You.
All I was going to say, there's always the idea that, certainly for me growing up, that I used to think that the government, knew what to do. You know what I mean? Knew the answers.
Yeah.
And they kind of.
Did you think that, or did you hope that, or did you just not give it?
No.
Much thought?
Well, maybe I just assumed that, but what's become glaringly obvious, especially over the past couple of years, is that they're as clueless as anybody else, but they just hold the power and make the decisions.
And some are well intentioned, and some are not.
And some are not. Yeah, exactly.
And I just, sorry, I'm derailing the whole thing, but where does government go from here? Do we even try and change the current system, or do we just have the Bitcoiners build elsewhere and slowly migrate to it? And the people who go migrate first are the biggest benefactors of migrating first.
I think that the reality is that government has been, or an entity, a person or a group that's had a monopoly on the means of violence is such a ancient kind of institution that's been with us for so long that it's almost impossible. It's literally almost impossible to conceive of a society organized in any other way. And that's why people think I'm insane when I say, oh no, we don't need a government. And I'm not, whether it's practically possible or not is almost a different question. But I certainly don't advocate for chaos. I think that it's really just that I think the society would still function with institutions and centers of power, and it's just that there's not one group with a monopoly on all the guns, basically. I think, if you look back on the history of the Western world and specifically the way that something like, English common law has developed an iterative sort of process where the law of the land or the rules that people live by has kind of been developed through trial and error over centuries, and it's not handed down by decree by some stupid government that's just been elected last year. Law is almost like this sacred thing, laws are there to be discovered by the process of human reason rather than made up on the spot by whatever reaction to events. So but I certainly don't advocate for violence and blowing up things because which is something that's associated with anarchy, because this whole thing is premised on a logical kind of exploration of ethics. If we start with the non-aggression principle, which is you're allowed to do whatever you want, but you're not allowed to use violence or the threat of violence to take someone else's stuff. And it's just about applying that principle consistently to everything. And so, like it or not, like a government, even if you think there's a role for government and the government does a lot of good, it still doesn't pass that test of like, if I don't like the way the government is serving me, it's not like I can be like, I don't think I'll pay my taxes this year. Like I'd end up in jail. And the response to that would be, oh, well, but there's no alternative. Like would the alternative be just chaos and everyone's murdering each other? Well, that's almost a different story. But the problem is that government doesn't pass that. The very concept of government doesn't pass that test of the non-aggression principle. And I think coming on to your question, Hats, of like, where do we go from here? Like there's a difference between what would be the ideal end result in theory versus like what's the best thing to do right now. And I think the best way forward would be for like, the only way we're going to figure this out is for people to get the opportunity to organize on a much smaller scale. So like, yeah, I'm a big advocate for localism and local self-determination. Like I'd love to see, for example, I don't think there's much hope for anything like this happening in Australia in our lifetime. But like, if you look at the US, like it'd be fascinating if they split up and the states themselves once again regain their sovereignty from the federal government. And like, so Texas and Florida be like, well, this is the way we're doing it, whereas California and New York like, no, we're doing it this way. And like, fine, like let them do that. Like, and people can move to the place where they think that the system of organization suits their values. Like, should people be allowed to have guns? Like, how does education work? Like, healthcare, like all these things. Like, if it's organized on a very small scale and like there's almost would be like all these experiments going on with what's the best way to actually organize a society. And it'd be really interesting to see the results of that rather than what we've got now, which is these like, a couple of dozen mega social democracies. Like there's sort of with central banks, like there's no real alternative. Like it's kind of weird and depressing the way the whole world is almost in lockstep in terms of the way governments are organized.
Yeah.
What's even interesting to see the likes of some of the, maybe the not Bitcoiners, but tech folks from the West Coast in the States moving to Austin. I think Tesla moved their manufacturing over to Austin.
You're talking about Silicon Valley? Is that on the west?
Yeah. So, so even if they say they're not keen on Bitcoin, they're taking themselves away from the other thing that's been put forward as progressive.
Yeah, true.
Right. So their actions speak louder than the words. Is my point, really.
Yeah, I think businesses will, if regardless of Bitcoin, I think people who are trying to run businesses, and it's people who run businesses that, that's the thing that like, it basically enterprise in as much as like the creation of capital and production and exchange, like that's like the basis of human civilization. And governments can only exist by, governments don't create wealth. They don't create resources themselves. Like all they can do is take resources away from people who have already created them. And you might say, oh, but they're doing good stuff by, what they spend that on. But yeah, first and foremost, the wealth's got to be created somehow. And so, yeah, I think there's this natural process where when government becomes too restrictive and too excessive, and there's a natural process of capital flowing to places where it's treated better. And yeah, you're seeing exactly that happen in the US, both in terms of businesses, like you gave the example of Tesla, but like even if you look at I saw that interesting graph about the change in US population in the last year or two, and how New York and California are like a net loss of all these people, but Texas and a lot of these other more open states are like drawing people in. So yeah, that's a really interesting process to watch unfold.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the economic migrants go, the ones most able will go first, right?
Yeah.
What that leaves behind for other people is a different conversation, I guess. I can see us triggering, like, the state is huge in Western democracies, like this employment by the state, nurses, doctors, teachers, firefighters, librarians, right? The state is massive. So I can see the conversation saying, well, there's no role for government in the future. Well, anybody listening who is a government employee is sitting there thinking, well, hang on, who pays my wages? So this is really triggering for them. But it's not to say that their skills are not required in the future. It's just to say that maybe the organisation of those skills it would be done differently. Like in Australia, where we had the bushfires, when it came to it, the person that was helpful to you if your house was at risk was your neighbour, your local fire brigade, or whatever. It wasn't Canberra.
Yeah, definitely.
So things would reorganise. Does that mean it's going to be smooth? Absolutely, I don't think it's going to be smooth. But it's just going to be.
It's not the fault of the people who, whether if you're calling in life is to be a teacher or a librarian or a doc. My wife's works in the hospital system. Like, okay, those things are or if you're a fireman, like those things are run by the government. But those services are needed in any society. So right. It's hard to draw the line between, at what point, because I would say that there's this inherent ethical problem with even the concept of government, and that would apply to obviously like the politicians, but I don't necessarily think it applies to just because someone draws a salary from the government, it doesn't imply anything other than that the government just happens to have co-opted that particular industry when they probably don't need to. But the problem is though that there's an incentive problem in that system where, like, as we've seen when half the population draws its income from the government, whether it's in a government job or on government support, that sort of inevitably grows. And like, in the last 2 years in Australia, we've seen, enterprise destroyed and all these small businesses being crushed. And whereas at the same time, the state has grown, like politicians' salaries have gone up, like employ more police. And so with it, every single time that happens, like the state grows at the expense of the capital, system that actually supports it. And like, that's one of the points that's made in Anatomy of the State, which is based on this book by Murray Rothbard, which is that there's this inevitable progression towards bigger government, but that it's inherently unsustainable. Like you can't, like that, it can only grow to a certain point and it eventually collapses. And like we saw that happen, in fast forward in the Soviet Union, say, where it's a full-on communist system. But our current systems are kind of not really that different. They're just like, they're on that same path, but like at a slightly slower rate. And so, I think unfortunately what's the way out of this? It probably gets worse before it gets better.
And it can't be a quick process either. It's not, what I mean? We're not going to wake up.
No, it's not going to be the case that you've got, you happen to hold, one Bitcoin, you're going to wake up tomorrow and living in, nirvana. That's not going to be.
Yeah, like I think for someone who holds my views, like in my own lifetime, there's no good outcome, if you know what I mean. It's like, because even to get to a kind of version of the world that I would see as an improvement on the current one, like I think, it would almost only come about through the collapse of the sort of current order. And I think this is a fascinating conversation in itself, is like where we're headed with all this. And I've been guilty of, even pre-Bitcoin, like sky is falling type stuff, and like the financial system's going to collapse. And, it's amazing how they've been able to sort of kick the can down the road.
Incredible. It's incredible.
And so it's like, are we still going to be here like in 20, 30 years time, like just talking about the same stuff, or
are we going to be Peter Schiff? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
That's it, right?
But like, it must be the case that this whole Corona thing has like fast forwarded all the processes that we're talking about. Like, I think
definitely,
there's so many kind of cycles that I think are coming to an end, like this long-term debt cycle, like, and the cycle of a global reserve currency. Like, I think the US dollar is at the end of that cycle.
Interest rates are at all-time lows.
Interest
really.
Rates, like I don't know if you guys have read The Fourth Turning, but like the cycle that they talk about in that book, like the end of of that sort of social cycle. Yeah, it's an interesting time. Like, I think we're at, you just always want to be careful being sort of like hyperbolic, but like I think we're sort of going through the gates of this, of something, and like it's hard to predict what's going to be on the other side. But I think there's such a lack of social consensus, like in the most broad terms, that if you compare it to previous decades, like even if you go certainly compared to like the post World War II era, where like it's sort of, there was more trust in institutions, like, and more people seem to be on the same page with like how we're going to build society. And even if you look back to times that was sort of had a reputation for being the flip side of that, like the 60s and the sort of, that kind of revolutionary era was still pretty like tame compared to what's happening these days. So I think where we are at the end point of this kind of inevitable cycle of like a decline, and then something's going to get rebuilt on the other side of it. It's just hard to say what. And that's when we get into this thing of like, is it going to be, and like, it's really scary the way there's a chance it goes down this system that resembles the Chinese model. Like, that's the worrying thing, is that all of our political systems are like trending more in that direction than they are in the direction of more freedom and smaller government.
Yeah, it's the end of cycles often bring about conflict, and conflict traditionally was war where tanks cross borders. The Bitcoin side, bringing it back to Bitcoin a little bit, the hope that it gives you is that you can fight an economic war rather than fighting a physical war. But whether we are like the transition, it depends how long this transition is, right? We all think it's coming, but if the transition is a 5-year period, that we were maybe, but if the transition is a 50-year period, there's probably a good long stretch where we're going to have really negative outcomes all over the place, which is it's not a nice thought.
No.
I love there's an initiative called Free Private Cities, where they're like, whether it's a practical initiative or not, the guys that are doing it are Bitcoiners. They're trying to kind of actually practically put in place this localism model that we're talking about, where if you could somehow get control of a piece of land, and this is the real challenge, is like, how do you actually get a hold of a physical location where you could do something like this, and not be simply beholden to whatever state owns that land, like, and setting up a city where it's a purely contractual arrangement, where like you sign a contract about how much you're going to pay in fees and for the most basic services, like protection and sort of the justice system, and then everything else happens on the free market. Like, it's a really fascinating experiment that I don't know if it'll succeed or not, but that's the kind of thing where like, that would be, it would be really interesting to see something like that play out. Like,
well, and the other point is someone's having a go, someone's trying it, which
they're actually trying something. Like, because I sit around talking about this shit all day, but like, they're actually out there trying to do something. But a lot of it is also how you live your own life. Like I've moved out of the city. Like I live in a rural area. Try and be more self-sufficient when it comes to food, and it's hard. There's stuff that's really hard to get away from, like the education system. It is tough to get away from. Like there's sort of not much alternative in Australia to the sort of government-run education system. There are things you can do in the way that you set up your life, and you can build a community where you sort of, like, I feel like I've the last few years have sort of weathered the storm a bit better just because of the way I've set myself up. So yeah, it's certainly possible to to improve your circumstances and change them for the better, like towards the things that you value.
And I guess the other great case study we have to watch is El Salvador. Because you're saying before that all countries print money to get to inflate their currency away, but if you are already using the currency of another country, either purely on the US dollar, they were getting absolutely no benefit from any stimulus plan. No citizen of El Salvador got any benefit from a stimulus in the States, even though that is the currency they use. So there was pretty much no risk, or at least no loss to them trying it. And now there's incredible things happening. I mean, the Bitcoin bond in the city, and the guys at Bitcoin Beach, and there's a lot of Bitcoiners heading that way. I mean, it is a case study for us all to be watching, and perhaps there'll be other countries, possibly other South American countries, they'll be watching most closely, and we might see maybe we could see another two countries in the next 12 to 24 months adopting Bitcoin as a...
Where did Strike just announce? Was that Argentina?
Argentina. Argentina. I don't actually know that.
Yeah, it's fascinating because what's going to happen in El Salvador, because the thing is, like, Bitcoin is inherently anti-government. Like, I don't really think that those two things are compatible, in as much as that if you're a government like the government of El Salvador and you come out and say, we're going to go onto a Bitcoin standard, and if you honestly mean that, like, you've then shut off that ability to collect seigniorage from your money. So you're then, and that's the main way the governments are funded. So you're effectively shutting down that funding route, and you're going to rely purely on taxation, which is a much more difficult way to do it. Now, as you said, like, they were on the system before where they were relying on the US dollar. Like, they didn't have they were sort of already in that situation, like, where they were just using dollars, like they didn't have their own currency. So I don't know enough about the history of El Salvador because it's like, where do they even come up with their money to run the government? Like, is an interesting question for me, because it's like, it's a poor country, like, and I'm sure that tax compliance in El Salvador is not high, and they were running on the US dollar. So, like, where did the government actually get all its money is to run its day-to-day operations? I'm not sure. So
they did used to have the El Salvadoran colon, I think it was called, the currency, but I'd have to double check back and see when they came off.
Yeah, so they obviously went through some kind of like collapse of their own currency.
Yes.
I wouldn't have been able to tell you what year, but yeah, it'll be, and then the sort of game theory and the economics of an individual country and a poor country at that, which doesn't probably have much of a industrial base, or adopting this standard of a super hard currency. And obviously it's still in theory at the moment. Like, in practice, the US dollar is still kind of practically, I suppose, their currency. But yeah, it'll be really fascinating to see how it plays out. I think the way it plays out in their favor is probably the way they've been angling, which is that, like, they just draw in capital in terms of Bitcoin itself, Bitcoin businesses, people who are interested but like shit, like I want to go to El Salvador, like even if it's just to like go for a surf and like sit on the beach, like I'm definitely going. So
like people that want a visa, people that want to own property, people want a second passport, or all these kind of things. So there are ways,
But yeah, in terms of just how I'm just fascinated to see how they run an economy on Bitcoin, and like if it actually goes ahead, like if check in again in 5 years, like and because I think the simplest playbook for governments is to buy Bitcoin and put it on their sort of the balance sheet of the country, but then they've still got their own currency that they're kind of, so like that's the way I imagine it would happen, is like that's kind of the way you cheat the game, is like you print money and buy Bitcoin, but you're still kind of forcing the shitty money on your citizens. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a few states kind of employ that strategy, whereas El Salvador seems to have really done the like proper.
Yeah,
like the guy's obviously been influenced by the Bitcoin narrative. Like it's fantastic. It'd just be really interesting to see. Well, at
the end of the day, he's just a guy who's on Twitter. People get like he's just another guy
buying Bitcoin on his phone. Did you see that today? Like I think Bloomberg said, he's got to be the only nation state leader that buys or trades in inverted commas Bitcoin on his phone, and his reply was naked. So he's.
He's just trolling.
He's just trolling.
It's incredible to watch that. Now, who knows whether we don't know whether he's a well-intentioned or not well-intentioned guy. We don't.
All we know is that he's nude.
Well, all we know is nude. But it's such an interesting thing to watch. You like there, maybe Nigeria might be quite interesting to watch, as you say. Maybe states in America are interesting to watch. But the game theory would say that anybody who's going to do it would do it quietly. It's interesting that he chose not to. Like, as you say, but then he didn't have the ability to print his own money. So maybe there's a country out there that does have the ability to print their own money who are doing so and starting to hodl Bitcoin. Now, who knows?
But as Richard was saying, I think for some of them, I think it's going to be a just in case kind of a buy. Like let's just get some in case it.
You have to.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Maybe
buy a little bit just in case.
Yeah.
Just
obviously for the El Salvador one, it's like the PR value of it. He obviously was going down that road, but I think there's also a strategy of doing it quietly while he still can. And maybe there's a lot of governments that are already doing that.
And I sort of think that, and then I look at the price action. I think no, it's not. That's me, my hopefulness that they're doing it. But looking at the price, I would think if there was any significant buying it from a nation state level, we would not be where we are. But
I think I agree in that, like, certainly not the kind of countries like a strip. Like maybe there's some places with exceptional circumstances where it makes sense, but like, there's no one. It's not happening here, for example, for any time soon.
No,
like it's so impossible to even think about. Like that, it'd be just crazy to even. Like we all think it would be a good idea, obviously, but like. Think about how far removed our kind of line of thought is from like the people who actually work in those circles, like in the Treasury Department or imagine the RBA like coming out and saying, "Oh, we've just bought some big." Like it's not going to happen.
I 100% agree. I guess that the only time I would change my mind on that is when potentially Bitcoiners or maybe bankers infiltrated is probably the wrong word, but started to take up government positions, and maybe they would take some of their ideas with them. I don't see, ScoMo, for example, ever being convinced by, Brendo versus ScoMo. That would be a good one.
No one's going to be convinced by me.
But
that'd be great. Yeah, we'll get, you get, it's like the other problem is that, and I can't even bring myself to follow closely what's going on with the like some like Senate inquiry into like fucking hell. Like the thing is like what's evident is that they don't even understand. Like even the people within the system who have been tasked with understanding this and like preparing Australia for the digital currency future or this bullshit, like they don't even understand the difference between Bitcoin and crypto. Like it's not so. Yeah, even if you get people who are like crypto enthusiasts, like they still might be a decade away from actually fucking understanding, what it's all about.
Frankly, even some of the Bitcoiners, right? Yeah. The Bitcoiners that are trading, like, what are you doing? There's no need to do that. And so I mean, maybe
we're still such a neat, such a niche, like crazy fringe. Obviously a lot of people own Bitcoin, in that, like, it's like when a lot of my acquaintances now, who, like, a lot of them, like, oh yeah, I got, like, they show me their account on whatever app they've got. I bought some Bitcoin. In their trading account. So obviously a lot of people own Bitcoin, but but it's like, because it's like $200 or something, but the journey from there to like where we're at, where it's like, obviously Bitcoin's, where you're comfortable, like, with the majority of your savings in Bitcoin, like that's a step too far for most people.
It's we've got a long way to go. So do you have any sort of we could talk, and we could even do this again, but we could talk all day about the movies, but I'm just conscious of the time and the people listening and how long they want to listen for. But do you have any sort of hopes for the year ahead, or what are you looking at for the next, one, in terms of the Bitcoin community, but also like for your own business and that side of things? What are you hoping for in the next sort of 12, 24 months?
I think it's more for me right now, like, I'm more interested in my own personal life and my family, and sort of setting myself up in a way that, that I think that part of my life is going well. When it comes to my business, like, I'm at that point where the people who run the business with me, I've made a conscious effort to step back, and, like, I've got a team of people who I think are doing a better job than I could at running the business, probably because, like, I'm too obsessed with Bitcoin to like focus on it, if you know what I mean. So I'm almost doing, working a bit less, which I have been doing for the last few years. And I think, giving myself more time to keep doing Bitcoin related projects. Like, because it takes a lot of discipline that like, if I'm not like super focused, like, a few months will get away from me, which has happened to me like the last 3 or 4 months. Like, you sort of, like, unless you really like got the self-discipline to sit down at your desk, and you also like have this idea that's good enough to like motivate you to work, like, those two things don't actually coincide all that often. So try not to be too hard on myself for like letting things just like not being that productive for certain stretches. But like, I got a couple of ideas for film projects that I think I want to see, through this year. So I think that's about all I could ask for, and I'm sort of
anything you want to share, or is that keeping that under your hat?
I'll keep it under my hat. I better keep it under my hat. I definitely like to like under promise, and I hate like talking something up and then not following through with it. So I tend to like literally not mention stuff till it's actually
ready to drop.
Done.
That's good. That's smart.
Is there anything anybody can help you with for the ideas you've got? Is there anything you're looking for from anybody else?
Hats is really good at dancing.
Dancing. You're a man.
You know, like, not necessarily, but I just love to, like, every now and then people reach out to me to say either they've enjoyed watching my films, or that, they are interested in working together, or they've got ideas for projects. Like, I'm always want to, like, part of my whole reason for doing this is to like, to sort of share these ideas with like-minded people and like talk about it. So I'm always open to people reaching out to me to sort of discuss these kind of ideas. So yeah, absolutely. But nothing specific necessarily.
It is nice to see Bitcoin seep into different areas of culture, and go off in different directions. You can't keep on top of it all, obviously. But you see people, Bitcoin for dentists. Well, that's great. Never gonna pay any attention to that, but it's really important for the dentists, right? So that I'm happy to see it doing that. I would love to see seep into music a bit more. I think culturally that would be a good thing. Like there's nothing better than a Michael Saylor clip and a dance track.
I was imagining hip hop, making it rain in a strip club. But what are they doing there?
Maybe
lightning wallets.
I don't know. Or it's going to be really interesting to see it seep into sport as well.
Yeah. It is.
Well, it is with exactly with firstly with the Perth Heat, the baseball. And then obviously the little idea was Peter McCormack's over with a football team, soccer team.
Oh, but even just sports stars as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just seeing it drift off in different directions is great.
Yeah.
Mate, give people a send off to the 3 films and also to your own wherever you'd like to send them.
I think the simplest thing is to go to my Twitter page, which is rjames_BTC. And that's got links to all the film projects. Like each one of them's got its own little website. But if you go to my Twitter, there's links there to go through. So that's probably the best place to go to find them.
Awesome. Well, it was great to have a windless chat with you, mate. So thanks for sticking around.
If you guys are outside, you've done well for it to be quite. It looks quite calm.
It's very still and calm at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. It says
it's such a pleasure to chat with you guys. Thanks for having me on. I'm so one of my I reckon our get together in Murrurundi was one of the highlights of my year. So I don't know if you guys are planning to go to Beechworth in March, but
are you going?
I'm really for sure I'll be there because it's close to me.
Yeah,
I know it's a long way for you guys.
I don't know if I can, to be honest. I got a lot on, but
I'm keen.
Yeah. Oh man.
I'm
I don't know if the wife.
Anyway, but that's been an awesome meeting people. It was one thing to interact with people online, but it's been so good to build a bit of a community here at home of people who are on this.
And because the guys have decided to take it a little bit more rural, the only people that are there are people who care and they want to come.
That's a good point.
It's a complete filter over just some bullshit crypto guy who's just bought, whatever he's bought and then wants to come along and tell you how Bitcoin is wrong.
Yep.
They're not there. So if any solid Bitcoiner just wants to go and talk to other Bitcoiners and meet people in the real world, I would highly recommend that too. Beechworth in March is when we're talking about.
All right. I'll talk to the wife. Thanks, mate.
Richard, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
You're a legend.
See ya.
Hey guys, if you've made it this far, thanks so much for listening. The plan with the pod is to do sort of guests one week and myself and Brendo the other week, so hopefully that's working for you. If you don't like one of them, just listen to the one you do like. If you want a little bit more information from us, you can find it at bitcoin-first.com/learn.